We share these streets.
True tales
of everyday folk
in bygone Nottingham.
Episode 18. Henry. In 1845, royal assent was given to the Enclosure Act, which would drastically rethink the layout of Nottingham. The town centre was notoriously overcrowded and unhygienic, full of poor people drawn here by the boom in various industries. A report in the same year by J.R. Martin stated that the courts, alleys and lanes of Nottingham present scenes of a deplorable character and of surpassing filth and discomfort. The refuse is allowed to accumulate until by its mass and its advanced putrefaction it shall have acquired value as manure. The 1845 Act was intended to provide better housing for workers at the expense of common land that had previously been utilised for agricultural and pastoral fields. The Industrial Revolution had changed how people worked and lived, and fields made way for factories and housing for factory workers. To the east of Nottingham centre was an area known as Lammas pastureland, part of which was a clay field. Lammas is a corruption of Loafmas, an old Christian holiday that falls on the 1st of August and celebrates bread made with the first wheat harvest of the year. The Enclosure Act granted permission for the Clayfield portion of the Lammas pastureland to be built upon for the first time to form a new residential and commercial area with the distinctly unimaginative name of Newtown. There probably couldn't be a neater illustration of the change in times than land associated with the harvest being built upon. Over time the name of the area changed, and we now know Newtown as St Anne's, or for some young locals, Stan's. A popular local beauty spot for visitors was St Anne's Well, a natural spring, and it is from here that the street St Anne's Well Road got its name. In turn, the new residential area got its name from the road. Local lore has it that the well, which most locals called by its older and more traditional name of Robin Hood's Well, had healing properties, especially for afflictions of the eyes. It was one of several healing wells in the area, the others being rag wells. This meant that spring water could be used to soak a rag, which would then be applied to the afflicted body part and tied to a nearby bush. One of the rag well locations is known definitely to have been the junction of St Answell Road and Ransom Road, close to the old police station at that location. At one time the spring was channelled through a tap on the outside wall of the police station, and was also used as the water source for a nearby cabman's shelter. The other Ragwell's location is less well documented, but a possible site is between Thornywood Rise and St Answell Road, where modern Permain Drive and Wood Lane Gardens are situated. The fact that there was more than one well in the area can be detected in the fact that the middle section of St Answell Road is named the Wells Road, since it housed several wells. It's called St Answell Road at both the town end and the Mapley end, so the three wells and maybe others must have been around that middle section. Once the pasture land had been built upon, working people started to move out to Newtown. It was crowded but in a more organised manner than the old town centre had been. Houses were typically quite narrow, so that more could be squeezed into each street. Some were the type of back-to-back houses that would come to be banned in the 1909 Housing Act. Others were through houses, which have backs facing each other across an alleyway. Like many such houses in other parts of Britain at the time, they were built in a hurry and with cheap materials. Initially they might have seemed attractive to workers used to the squalor of the town centre, but in time the corners that were cut would manifest themselves as serious problems of various kinds. On the 4th of March 1969, a film called St Anne's was shown on ITV and shocked viewers. It had been made by Stephen Frears, who lived in St Anne's and went on to direct films such as My Beautiful Laundrette, Dangerous Liaisons and Philomena. It was a documentary and mainly through interviews with local people told how they lived. The population density in St Anne's was reportedly 3 times higher than the rest of the city. 8 out of 10 homes had no bathroom and were reliant on tin baths filled with boiled water. 9 out of 10 homes had no indoor toilet. The conditions in St Anne's became so bad that the city council decided to demolish the area, rehouse everyone, and rebuild the area from scratch. This was about 100 years after the original new town had been built. The rebuild gave us the St Anne's we know today, at least in the rough layout. We're really grateful in this episode to be joined by writer, TV and film producer and poet Henry Normal. Henry's mum and dad lived in St Anne's from around 1948, and Henry was born there in 1956, so he grew up in the area in what we'd now consider a time of terrible decline.
So I was born on 34 Seymour Street. And when I say I was born there, I was actually born there because obviously back in 1956, you didn't tend to be born in hospital, and I'm the third child of 5, so I was definitely born at home, so probably upstairs. And it's a back-to-back house on a terrace row, which must have been built, I suppose, in the previous century, and it was quite run down. So obviously my first memories, I suppose, are going to be around the age of 3, 4. So we're talking really memories from 1960 to 1965 when we moved. But I have distinct memories of those. And the first thing that I remember is, of course, the bombed out buildings. Now, you probably think that by the year 1965, that have sorted the bombed out buildings, because obviously we're talking about 1940 to 1945, but they hadn't, and we played in bombed out buildings, and there was one at the junction of Beaucamp Street and Seymour Street. There was a bombed out building there that we played in, and I actually found a gas mask that was there, which was very strange. Obviously been there, and I did the worst thing I could possibly do, is I put it on my head and breathed in. So I'm breathing in air that's been trapped there since, for 20 years. And anyway, I took ill and almost died. What you like when you're a kid, it's a good fun thing to put on. So you could say that the Germans almost killed me back then. I could have been the last casualty of the war.
Seymour Street, where Henry was born, still exists. It connects Carlton Road with Stonebridge Road, close to Stonebridge City Farm. The site where his house had been in 2021 is part of the Lidl supermarket complex.
But it was very run down then. I say very run down. Cobble streets. The front came straight onto the pavement, or coursey as we used to call it in them days. And the back, there was no garden, there was a yard, and then your toilet at the end of the yard, and you had a separate toilet, but the toilets were back to back on each other with next door's toilet. And so there's no garden as such. Whilst I say it was run down, people did keep their houses spotless. And I always remember, because it was very much a community, and I would call people up and down the road, my auntie and my uncle, and lots of people, and I'd be in and out of their houses, and there was lots of kids. I think it must have been a 3-bedroomed house, or possibly a 2-bedroomed house. But I think we went up into the attic as well. And as I say, with 5 kids. It was quite cramped, but there was a lot of community spirit, and there was a weird thing that used to happen then, is that you would scrub your step. Now people think about those houses and think that they must have been dirty and whatever. They weren't. People don't even scrub the step these days. I mean, not even the most famous doorstep in the country, 10 Downing Street. They don't scrub that step. You've never seen them scrubbing that step, and imagine the amount of slime that's been over that step. In fact, I tell you what, there's a very, very, very weird thing that used to happen is, despite the fact that you were cramped in, you would have a living room that you never lived in. So the front room, or living room as it was often called, was kept immaculate, and that you would have your china and your brass, and you shine up your brass with your brasso, and you'd polish your china, you put it in your china cabinet, and you'd have, but you wouldn't sit in it. You'd actually sit in the middle room of the house, where your telly was, and that would be your main residence, and you kept the other. I don't know what you kept it for. I remember I had an auntie that we used to call Auntie up the road, Auntie Ivy, and the only time I ever saw her in the living room was when she was dead. They put a coffin in the living room, and I always remember, because they put she had doilies on everything. And I always remember a coffin, they'd put some lace over it. So it was like there's a doily on the coffin as well.
The ultimate doily.
The ultimate doily, yeah. The final doily. That'd be a good name for a film from Nottingham. 1960s, The Final Doily. Because everybody had lace curtains, because there was a lace factory at the bottom of the street. And one of my earliest memories as a kid is seeing all the women who used to sit in this middle room, and they'd come to our house and sit in the middle room, and my mum would go to other houses, and they'd do edging, because it was Wright and Dobson was the name of the company. I think they were a finishing company for lace, and an edging company and stuff like that. So all the women would sit on one side of them. They'd have a pile of lace, and they would sit talking to each other, and their eyes would never look at the lace. They would always be looking at the other women, and they'd sit in like a circle, and the lace would move through their fingers, and then there'd be a pile on the other side of them. And often I would put the pile in a pram, and I'd wheel it down to Wright and Dobson, and get some more. So this was but what it meant was that you had this great sense of community amongst the women, and of course you were living right up against each other, and there were no barriers in the way, and you would often see people at the front or the back. A good example of this is bonfire night. So on bonfire night, all the people would put their bonfire fireworks up and down the street. And so all the kids would go from one door to another, watching everybody's fireworks. And the dads would like do a display. They take pride in, oh, you've come to see my display. And then they would do their display. And the bonfire was probably the worst place it could be. Was at the junction, at the top junction where Beauchamp Street met Seymour Street, and there was two shops, so you could have burned both shops down, and it was massive. And all the kids and many of the youths, as you might call them in them days, would build this up, and it would be now obviously I was little, so it looked bigger to me, but I'm sure looking back it's probably 20 foot tall. And there was lots of fires in those days. I don't think people would allow, they'd be on a recreation ground nowadays, wouldn't they? But it was it was in the middle of the street, so you couldn't drive for a couple of days before and a day after. You couldn't drive up and down the street. It was a big communal event. There was two corner shops. You see, now there's Carlton Road on the bottom, which had a row of shops, and you would go in those shops, and there was like a newsagent there that my dad would always get his newsagent from, and they knew his name, and I'd go in and say, HB, they'd call him, because of humbug, HB, because they always had humbugs, HB's papers, and they'd give me HB's papers, and so you knew them, and you knew the greengrocers, and that obviously that was all. We didn't have a supermarket there. There's no supermarket there. So it was you had all these places where you bump into fellow people, but the corner shop was a definite one, and you would have a slate at the corner shop. So you'd go up and get your dad some fags, as you would do in them days. You couldn't do now. When I was about 7. And they'd say, oh, do you want some Fry's chocolate cream for your mum? And I'd say, oh yeah, she loves that. I get some Fry's chocolate cream. And they put it on the slate, and then halfway back home I'd try and eat the Fry's chocolate cream, or nibble a bit. you'd say Mr. Price at the corner shop, or Mr. Vose, because there was Voses and Prices, and they knew your name, and they knew, you know, whose kid you were, and they knew the parents and everything. So it was a very it felt very safe. Now, I mean, when I say I felt safe, we never locked the door. Now, people say that, don't they? And they go, "Oh, never lock the door," you know, and we're in and out each other's houses. And you think there'd be a lot of theft, but there was none that I can point to. There's none. If you think about it, you didn't lock your door. You put all your valuables in the front room where people could get them on the front door, and you scrubbed the steps so it was nice and clean for the burglars to get in. There's a great documentary about St Anne's, which was made in 1969 by Stephen Frears, who I've worked with on Philomena. He directed Philomena, and I was talking to him about it, and he lived in St Anne's at the time. And I watched the documentary, and when you consider that it was 1970, was months away, it was, I mean, it made me cry to think what people had gone through. Now, we didn't have any damp as such that I can recall. Mind you, as a kid, you don't register those, but I don't think we had any damp as I recall. But some of the houses did, and you know, there was a sort of an idea of it being hand to mouth, and certainly, you know, there was a lot of clothes being made. You know, if you got new clothes, it was a big deal. I remember the first time I had long trousers. That was, you know, hipsters they were. That was a very big deal. One of the reasons I like cardigans is my mum used to knit cardigans, which are a little easier than jumpers, and you can fasten them up and leave them open, so you know they last longer, and you can wear them in different weathers and stuff. And I've picked the early pictures of me, as you'll see, I've sent you some, are all in cardigans. You know, balaclavas, the other thing. I don't wear balaclavas these days. Different connotations these days, isn't it? Balaclavas. Now, we owned our own house for some reason. Why Dad would buy a slum, I've no idea. I mean, that's not the most astute businessman. So he worked at Raleigh. He worked in the gun factory before then. And of course, he was in the RAF in the war. And this was the first home of the marriage. Married my mum. And my mum, before she died, she was like a greengrocer. So we weren't well to do. But for some reason, he bought the house. So anybody that knows Seymour Street might remember that number 34, which is smack in the middle of the bottom section, when the council came to paint all the doors, they would paint everything green, and it was the same quite dull green in that it was slightly dark, and so your door would be painted, your windows would be painted, of course the bus stops were painted, the railings were painted, the schools were painted, anything to do with the council was painted with this same green. And I hated green at the time, and you know, for many years. I mean, you know, obviously now I love the green of nature, but back then it was just too much. And so my mum, being a little bit of a rebel, she painted our door pink. So you could actually, going past on a 39 bus, you could see our door from Carlton Road. I don't know what the neighbours thought of it, but we went to St Matthias church as kids, and it was I think it was what they might call a C of E I church, in that you would wear a cassock and cotter. And I was what they call a boat boy, so I'd have the incense, and my brother David was leader of the choir, and you know, we would go there. I say go there religiously. That's probably you know, every Sunday. I say there was a great sense of community. I remember there was fete and galas and stuff like that at the church, and little plays and you know, sort of events put on. The other sort of community place really obviously was the pubs. and there was a lot of pubs there, obviously on bonfire night we would sit outside the pubs with a guy that we'd made up, sort of newspaper stuffed into them, and wait for the more drunken men to come out. Not the women; they wouldn't give you anything, but the more drunken men, being sentimental, would give you a few pennies. And but sitting outside a pub with a bag of crisps was very much a thing for kids in those days. And you'd see other kids there, and obviously the parents would all talk inside. There was a library very close, so that was very much a centre, and of course the school. So I went to Ogarth School, which is now an Hindu temple, I believe. And then I would have gone on to Manvers had we stayed there, and my brother went to Manvers. So apart from the fact that the houses were in need of repair, the infrastructure seemed quite in order.
Bilborough until the 1950s was a small village that had been owned by the Destrelli family since the 13th century. The corporation bought up the land specifically to build a residential area which people could inhabit after moving away from slums such as St Anne's. You might recognise this as being exactly the same blueprint that was used when St Anne's itself was built, a new town to accommodate people that had been living in squalor in the town centre.
So we moved in 1965, and my first sight of Bilborough, as we drove up sort of Beechdale Road and everything, is that there were prefabricated houses or prefabs. So some of them were small, what they used to call jerry-built houses, a bit like big campers. And strangely enough, they were like TARDISes in that I have been inside them, and that they feel quite big inside them. Although from the outside they look like a very small tin bungalow. And then there was the bigger houses which had cladding, if you like, put on the front of them, which I remember my mum not particularly liking. And then we got to Baythorne Road, and a lot of those were brick houses. So we lived in a 4-bedroomed end of terrace brick house. So there was basically 4 houses in a terrace, as opposed to the entire row in a terrace with entries, or I'm sure different people used to call them different things. I called them entry back then, but ginnels and jitties. So when we moved, it was a bigger house. It was obviously a newer house, and it had a front garden and it had a back garden. And you'll see I've sent you a picture of us sat on the front gate, that we had roses, as my mum liked a bit of colour, and we had privet hedges. Now, the privet hedges are great and give you a bit of privacy, probably where the privet bit comes from. But what it meant was that you were distanced even more from your neighbours. So you were cut off with these privet hedges, and you were slightly more spaced from them. Moving there as a kid, I just thought this was, I thought we were dead posh. I thought this was such luxury. When you went inside the house, the kitchen, you've got to remember that the kitchens in Seymour Street had been, if as an adult you put your hands fully out side to side, you could just about touch the sides in every direction. So the kitchen in Baythorne Road was like in fact, it was bigger than our old living room. So it was a big space with all the cupboards and everything. And the larder was probably nearly as big as the old kitchen. And we had airing cupboards, and we had immersion heater, right, which is an electric way of heating the water, as opposed to putting the kettle on the gas. Not that you'd turn the immersion heater on if your dad was home. It would go mad. It would go mad if you turn the. So in terms of the facilities, the kitchen was huge. The dining room had French windows. Ooh la la, French windows. I mean, this is something you could only dream of. And you had, and then you had a living room. And now the weird thing is, when we moved in there was no thought of having a spare room that you kept for best. We moved in there, and it was like somebody turned a switch and you used every room. And so your living room, you added your living room. That's where you had your television, and that's where you spent most of your time. Your dining room was a little bit of a through sort of place, but we did actually, because there's 5 kids and 2 adults, we did actually eat dinner. Certainly Sunday dinner and Sunday salads and stuff for tea. If you remember salads back then, which was lettuce, cucumber, tomato, and else. They were very limited back then. In fact, food was very limited back then, as I recall. Now, obviously, the difference in the toilet was quite remarkable as well. So we had a bathroom upstairs. Now, obviously, in Seymour Street, there was no bathroom. We had a tin bath, and we'd hang it on the back of the house, and then we'd bring it in, and it was cold because we'd been hanging it on the back of the house, and you put it down, and you get the kettle, and you'd boil up some water, and you'd put a couple of pans on, and you boil up some pans, and then you'd pour it in. And as a kid, I had to sit in one end, and my sister had to sit in the other end. And you'd have use the water, and you'd have it next to the coal fire, because there were coal fires in them. There's no central heating. So now we had a bathroom, which was a separate bathroom, and it had a toilet upstairs. So not only did you have a toilet in the house, but you had a toilet upstairs. You're halfway towards an ensuite. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's all ensuite these days, isn't it? But back then, that was very la-di-da. But the toilet downstairs, this was the thing that I always felt was quite weird. The toilet downstairs wasn't actually in the house. It was just outside the back door. It's like somebody had thought, well, these people, they're used to an outside toilet. We can't bring the toilet inside. We'll have it just outside, and we'll wean them into shitting. Which is quite. I mean, you'd never build a house like that now. There's no way you would build a house like that now. And I think some of them have altered it and knocked through and maybe put a door on the very outside bit before you get to the toilet. You had a coal shed outside and a shed for other things, rubbish usually. The fact that you had all this space and all this facility was brilliant. But what, of course, you didn't have, and this is where I still have a problem with town planners, is there were several things you did. You didn't have the sense of community, because when we moved in, even within 10 years, nobody from Seymour Street moved in our vicinity. Nobody from Seymour Street seemed to move to Bilborough. There was lots of different estates being built at the time, Strelly and, all the bits of, Outlay and Broxtowe and other bits. But there was no planning on saying, well, these people have spent years together. They know each other, they can support each other. We'll put them in a similar vicinity. So, as I say, all the people that we knew, we'd have to go on a bus and visit them, as opposed to just nipping next door or over the road. So that was a bit weird. And then because you got this privet edge around you, you were slightly distanced. Now, obviously, having kids play on the road, and we still played on the road. Obviously, it wasn't a cobble road like before, and we didn't play marbles. We used to play marbles in Seymour Street, where there'd be like a hole in the cobbles, and you'd nick the marbles in. But we played football as using a couple of cars as goalposts, and tin can lurgy, which was you kick a can and then run off, and somebody would have to go and pick the can and say that. And so because of the kids interacting, then obviously the parents, were then forced to interact. So there was still some interaction, but it seemed a little bit distant. And again, the shops, there were no corner shop. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to go to Bracebridge Drive, which was like, I don't know, 500, maybe 700 yards round. And there'd be a row of shops, and nobody knew your name, because the Bracebridge shops was for the whole of the area. So it wasn't for your street. It was for, something like, I don't know, over 100 streets. would use these shops. There was like a co-op supermarket bit, a Fine Fair, which was, for people, it's like Lidl without the glamour. There was like, you know, a butcher's and a baker's and you know, news agents, that sort of thing. And at the co-op, you would have a co-op number. Mine was the 117594. And you go in and you buy your stuff and you say 1175.94, and they put it on your divvy for the end of the year. And then if you bought a load of stuff, you get sort of a dividend at the end of the year.
Like a loyalty card, I guess, is like a modern equivalent.
Yeah, very early. And the Green Shield stamps and co-op stamps came in later. But it did strike me, going back then, that I'd gone from being a name to being a number. And I think that's indicative of what happened. And when you think about the pubs, there used to be lots of pubs. There was one pub on the estate, which is the Pelican pub. And that was it. And if you didn't like them or you fell out with somebody, you'd have to get on a bus to go to a pub. You couldn't walk to a pub. And churches, there was one C.V. and one Catholic church. So again, you know, for quite a big catchment area. So you were limiting these places where you could bump into people and form. Now, they didn't think to build a theatre. They didn't think to build an art centre. They didn't think to build a community space. There was no, I mean, obviously later on, as we got through the 70s and the 80s, people started thinking, oh, we need all these community places. But to start with, there was, I mean, we being C of E, we went to St John's, and there was like a little building next to St John's that was St John's community space, but it had to be tied to the church. And I'm sure, you know, there was a similar thing. In fact, you know, I went to some of the jumble sales in the Catholic version of this, which was just along the way. But no space where you could meet up without it being religious, just meeting up as, you know, as fellow human beings and having some sort of social thing, which is I think very strange. And you didn't have, I say, all these places where you would necessarily bump into each other as much. So, if anything, I think they gained something and they lost something. And I wonder if this move towards people being isolated, you know, is part of what's been going on, and that we're more and more moving out. And I think with COVID, people more and more are moving out and moving into the country and wanting a bit of elbow space and everything. It's, you know, and obviously we're on Zoom and stuff like that. There's a transition from us living very much as, let's say, a tribe, very much as a, you know, an interactive people, to us living very remotely. And for me, the big leap was from the terraced housing to the council estate.
Is this on reflection, really, that you think that, or do you think you were aware of it then?
Oh yes,
or is this?
Yeah, definitely, Scott. I was definitely aware of it back then, because it's a very visceral thing when you live through it, and the fact that you know, say old friends that I had at Seymour Street I couldn't see. I was aware of, and now obviously I made new friends, but really it was school was the way that you made friends, as opposed to, you know, playing on the same street. I mean, we did play on the street, but I think most of my friendships occurred, you know, through the interaction of school. And then I left when I was 20. I got married when I was 20, and I left Bilborough then. And went to live around different parts of Nottingham, Crockwell Bishop, Castle Boulevard, Top Valley, you know, all the glamorous places.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The formation of my outlook on life, I think, came from quite a split dynamic of Seymour Street and Baythorne Road.
Yeah, you can trace it to that, really, when you look back.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So the parks were the other thing. So you mentioned that there was a park right opposite Seymour Street called King
Edward's, yeah.
And so again, you'd go on to that. The park in Bilborough was a little bit further, and the catchment area for that park was quite wide. So you wouldn't go there to meet somebody, but you would go with somebody. So if we go to play football on the park, or just go to the park, you go with other people rather than go there. Whereas King Edward's Park, it was more of a sort of sense of well, that's where we always go. So if you go there, you're going to meet somebody. Parks were very different. It's funny thinking of the way we treat kids nowadays, because I used to walk to school with my sister. I must have been 5 and she must have been 7, and we'd walk along Carlton Road on his own, and we'd go to the park on his own, me age 5 and her age 7, and play, and then come back. Whereas you'd never send a 5-year-old kid to a park these days. And when I say a park, do you remember witches' hats? So a very strange metal sort of torture contraption that they used to have, that you'd hang on to, that wouldn't pass health and safety these days. And cobwebs, which was like a metal roundabout. And monkey bars, which was of course just scaffolding. But underneath, they'd have no. I mean, there's nothing to say monkey about. They weren't painted or anything like that, and there was no soft tarmac underneath of it. Just floor, basically. I don't know what it was, just floor. And they'd have. They started introducing these things where they put big round bits of concrete sewer pipes for you to run through. Big sewage pipes. What sort of imagination we were supposed to have about these sewage pipes? It was quite weird. And of course, you go on nowadays, and it's very soft tarmac, and everything's cushioned, and not only parents there, but each other's parents are looking over to make sure everything's okay. Of course, the other things you'd have there back in Seymour Street would be things like the rag and bone man that seemed to disappear when we got to the council estate. I think the pets tended to be different as well. I seem to remember, people keeping pigeons and people keeping mice and goldfish. Whereas when we went to Bilborough, there were more dogs and more cats. So I don't know whether it's to do with the space or another cultural thing. But
at Seymour Street, would you keep them in the yard, like if you had pigeons or mice and things? Do you know the backyard that you mentioned?
Yeah. We had that, there's not a lot you could do in that backyard, to be honest with you. It was just a place to walk through. You put your washing out, but the problem with putting the washing out at first was that Wright and Dobson had a chimney, and the smoke would come, and it would just put soot all over your clothes. And they did build the chimney up at one point because people complained, and I think the smoke then went over to Storer Street and went on their washing. Someone else's problem. They'd have to complain then.
Hey, that must be the start of the "not in my backyard" movement, pretty much literally, isn't it?
But it sounds very much like that, doesn't it? I say, being a kid at the time, I only saw the effect, not the mechanics of it all.
Do you know, kind of on that note as well, when you first heard that you were leaving St Anne's, did you feel sad to go, or was it more exciting about this new place? Because then you didn't know, that you would be more distanced.
Well, I think our parents made it more exciting because, of course, we had to go in a car to see the place. So that was going in a car was always like an exciting. So going with my mum and dad and my brothers and sisters, and we're all crammed into a little Morris Minor, and driving somewhere new is always an adventure. And as I say, when you get there, I mean, the amount of greenery there, the amount of edges and flowers and trees and everything meant that it was almost like countryside. So I think the first few years, there was a sense that this was definitely more healthy, and I was sort of quite aware of the change in the colour scheme. It's quite strange actually, because obviously from Baythorne, and certainly when you go up to Bracebridge, you can see Woollet Knoll, and it's almost like they'd moved us somewhere where we could see the toffs, just to make sure we were still obedient.
Where I grew up on Lenton Abbey, it's probably similar to Bilborough. Something really cruel there used to be in front of the shops. There used to be some grass that was just railined off, and we couldn't even go on it. And like, thankfully now it's a park, but then it just seemed so cruel. It was just some council grass, but we were not permitted at all to go on it, which I just find, what are you doing? What are you showing me? You're showing me some grass I can't go on. It used to irk me.
Yes, it's like here's something, but it's not for you.
Yeah.
It's not for you. You can look at it, but don't touch. There was no actual industry really in Bilborough. There was an industrial estate on Glaisdale Drive, and obviously when you left school, some people would go to a place called Crossland and Filters, which was a little factory that was there, but it was sort of on the side. It wasn't intermingled in the way that the Lace District had been intermingled with factories, and certainly I was conscious of on Seymour Street. Yeah, things like waste ground was always interesting, because it was a sort of a neutral space. And we used to go over to Glaisdale Road. There was a woods there, and find a little bit of unmanicured space, because it's quite strange, isn't it, growing up where everything around you is manicured, and there's nothing. It's almost like you feel untidy, like you're untidy in the place. I like that. I think if the whole world's manicured, oh my God, what an awful place it would be. We used to walk down to Woollet Knoll, and we'd walk down Old Coach Road. And I mentioned this to you before. Now I know that the significance of Old Coach Road, but back then I didn't. But I loved the fact that I walked down this road that wasn't really done up as a proper road. It was almost like a secret road. And you'd walk through woods, and you'd walk over a stream, and it was this like little bit of wild heaven before you got to Woollen Park, which was quite manicured and well presented. So that's area of Old Coach Road. Now, as I say, now I know the significance. Old Coach Road is where the first ever railway line in the world was laid. Now, it wasn't taught to me at school, even though the railway line went past Bilborough Grammar and quite near to William Sharp, and I went to both those schools. Nobody ever said, Huntington Beaumont had laid the first wooden tracks to bring coal down from Strelley to Woollen. So, but I loved it. It was actually at a steam railway just outside of Brighton, in a place called Sheffield Park, where I saw a big poster and a map, and it said first ever railway line, and it said Strelley, and I thought, well, I know Strelley, so I looked at it, and I looked at the map, and I thought, oh my God, it goes through Bilborough. Then I thought it goes through Old Coach Road. That's why it's called Old Coach Road. But why I would find that out just near Brighton as opposed to the school that he went past, I have no idea.
You got more information near France than you have in Nottingham about Nottingham.
Yes, it's very strange, isn't it? For me, Scott, they got a lot of things right, but the essence of human interaction is what they got wrong.
When St Anne's was demolished, one of the many pubs that was destroyed was the New Town Inn. Its name was a reference to the original name for St Anne's, and had lasted until 1970, long after the name fell out of use. Robin Hood's Well is now under concrete and tarmac between Kildare Road and St Anne's Well Road. For a time it was commemorated by a plaque at the rear of the Gardener's Arms pub, which sat up on the site for a few decades. Nowadays there's nothing at all commemorating this ancient spring that drew people to the area and provided clean water essential to preserving life in bygone times. There are anecdotal reports that some gardens in the neighbourhood occasionally flood, and it's thought that these are the springs of the old healing wells making themselves known once more. Many of the modern street names echo previous ones that stood nearby, which can make researching old addresses somewhat confusing. As an area, modern St Anne's is viewed snobbishly as an unsavoury and dangerous place. I lived there for many years and didn't find either of those things to be true. Estate agents pretend the area doesn't exist and refer to properties in St Anne's as being either Mapley, if it's a distance up St Answell Road, or a short walk from the city centre, if it's close to town. Anything is done to avoid being honest and saying the property's in St Anne's. Modern Bilborough is viewed almost as undesirably as St Anne's. I find snobbishness like this really distasteful, but in truth it says more about the snobs than the people living in the areas. In the 1800s, poor people living in slums in the town centre were moved out to the newly built St Anne's area, which was constructed on the cheap on formerly pastoral land. In the 1960s, people living in the slums that St Anne's had become were moved out to the newly built Bilborough area, which was constructed on the cheap on formerly pastoral land. It's not difficult to see the pattern. Countryside is destroyed for cheap housing to rehouse people from slums, but isn't maintained sufficiently and itself becomes an undesirable slum. Does the city now have a better long-term vision? Hopefully, but only time will tell. Thank you so much to Henry Normal for collaborating with us on this episode. His memories and reflections on St Anne's and Bilborough were amazing to hear,